Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover hidden histories, lost artifacts, and ancient mysteries. Join us as we explore the past secrets. Subscribe and dive into history's untold stories. In the heart of Florida stands a monument that defies explanation. It's called Coral Castle, built single-handedly by one very small man named Ed Leedskalnin. He carved and moved over 1,000 tons of massive coral rock, a feat that would challenge modern engineers with heavy machinery. He worked in secret, claiming he knew the secrets of the ancient pyramid builders. How did he do it? The legend of Coral Castle and its enigmatic creator, Ed Leedskalnin, is a story that feels fundamentally different from the ancient mysteries we often explore. It doesn't belong to a lost civilization or a forgotten epoch. Instead, it feels like a modern fairy tale, a myth born not in the distant past but in the bright, clear light of the 20th century. Its origins are not shrouded in the mists of antiquity, but in the well-documented, yet profoundly mysterious, life of a single man. The tale begins not with the spectacle of towering stones and impossible feats of engineering, which would come later, but with an event that is deeply, painfully human, the quiet and complete devastation of a broken heart. To understand the castle, one must first understand the wound that inspired it. Our story doesn't start in the sun-drenched, humid landscape of Florida, where the castle now stands as a bizarre and wonderful landmark, but thousands of miles away, across the Atlantic Ocean, in the cold, forested nation of Latvia during the early 1900s. It is here that we first meet the man who would inadvertently become a legend, though at the time, there was absolutely nothing legendary about him. Edward Leedskalnin was, by all accounts, an ordinary man and in some aspects, even less than ordinary by the standards of his day. Physically, he was strikingly small, a fact that would become central to his myth. He stood just 5 feet tall and weighed a mere 100 pounds, a slight, almost frail figure. His personality matched his physical stature. He was known to be quiet, intensely private, and a withdrawn individual, the kind of person you might easily overlook in a crowd, who would prefer the shadows to the spotlight. He was born into a family of stonemasons, so the gritty feel of rock and the chalky dust of the quarry were in his blood from a young age. He understood stone, but he was not a man of great physical strength or high social standing. He was poor, unassuming, and approaching his late 20s, an age when a man in his society was expected to have established a family and secured a future. Ed had neither. Then, Ed's world, which had been so small and quiet, was irrevocably changed when he fell deeply and completely in love. Her name was Agnes Skufst, and in Ed's mind, she was the center of the universe. She was only 16 years old, a full decade younger than him, and he affectionately, almost reverently, called her his Sweet 16. To him, she was not just a girl. She was the embodiment of youth, beauty, and a vibrant life that he desperately wanted to be a part of. He courted her with a sincerity that must have been compelling, because to his immense and overwhelming joy, she agreed to marry him. For Ed, this was the pivotal moment, the point at which his life was finally, truly beginning. He was no longer just a small, impoverished man from a rural village. He was on the brink of becoming a husband, the head of a family, a man with a defined purpose and a reason for being. But this beautiful dream was shattered with a swift and brutal finality. On the very eve of their wedding, with everything prepared, Agnes called it off. The precise reasons for her decision have been lost to the swirling mists of time and family lore, but the most commonly told and accepted story is that her family intervened at the last minute. They looked at Ed and saw not a loving suitor, but a list of deficiencies. They told Agnes she was too young to be married, and perhaps more pointedly, that Ed was too old for her, too poor to provide a comfortable life, and too physically small to be a worthy or respectable husband. The rejection was not just a private heartbreak whispered between two people, it was a profound public humiliation. In that one devastating moment, all of Ed's deepest insecurities, his age, his poverty, his size, were weaponized and thrown back in his face. He wasn't just losing a fiancée. In his own mind, He felt he was losing his very identity and his fundamental worth as a man. This crushing event became the undeniable catalyst for every strange and wonderful thing that followed. A different man, a more conventional man, might have succumbed to despair, withered under the weight of such a rejection, or perhaps simply moved on and found another life. But Ed Leedskalnin was not a different man. Something inside him broke that day, irreparably. But in the space where his heart had been shattered, something else was forged in the fire of his grief, a singular, obsessive, all-consuming purpose. He made a silent vow. He decided he would do something so grand, so magnificent, so utterly impossible, that it would serve as an undeniable testament to his worth. It would prove to Agnes, to her disapproving family, and to the entire world that he was not small or insignificant. He would build a monument to his lost love, a castle carved from the very bones of the earth, a structure that would stand for centuries as a symbol of both his undying devotion and his hidden, mysterious power. He would create a paradise of stone, a garden fit for a queen, even if he knew, deep down, that his queen would never set foot in it. And so, with a heart heavy with sorrow and a mind now swirling with secrets, Ed Leedskalnin left Latvia forever. He began a long, solitary journey, a self-imposed exile, wandering through Canada and the United States, taking whatever work he could find. For years, he was a ghost, an anonymous immigrant laborer drifting from place to place, working in lumber camps, on ranches, and for railroad companies. It was during this period of wandering, some researchers believe, that he began his intense, private studies into the hidden mysteries of the universe, delving into magnetism, electricity, and the ancient, unseen forces that he believed truly govern the world. Eventually, his nomadic journey led him to the warm, humid climate of Florida. He first settled in a small, remote town called Florida City around 1923. The location was perfect for his grand design. The land there was cheap and flat, but most importantly, it sat atop a massive, shallow bed of oolite limestone, a type of sedimentary rock formed from ancient coral. For Ed, this was the perfect canvas. Here, in this isolated, sun-bleached landscape, far from the world that had rejected him, he would build his monument. He purchased a small plot of land and began his life's work, a project that would consume him, body and soul, for the next 28 years. And he would do it almost entirely in secret. This secrecy is the very heart of the Coral Castle mystery. Ed was not just private. He was a recluse who guarded his methods with a fierce, almost paranoid determination. He chose to perform the bulk of his labor at night, working under the deep cloak of the humid Florida darkness, with only the silent stars and the soft, flickering glow of a single kerosene lantern as his witnesses. His few neighbors, living at a distance, would catch only fleeting, ghostly glimpses of him. They saw a small, shadowy figure moving silently and purposefully about in the darkness, a solitary ghost tending to his own garden of stone. They heard the faint, rhythmic, almost hypnotic sounds of chipping and scraping, the signature of a constant, patient labor that echoed eerily through the quiet, tropical nights. The rumors, fueled by the darkness and secrecy, began to swirl almost immediately. The central question was simple and confounding. How could this tiny man, working completely alone, be quarrying, carving, and moving blocks of coral that clearly weighed several tons each? It simply didn't make any logical sense. Local teenagers, their curiosity piqued by the stories, would try to sneak onto his property to catch him in the act, hoping to uncover his secret. But Ed seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to sense their presence. He would abruptly stop his work and stand perfectly still, melting into the shadows until they gave up and left, never once revealing his methods. The mythology grew. Some local children, peeking through the foliage, later claimed they saw him placing his hands on the massive stones and singing to them in a low hum, causing them to float like weightless balloons. Others, more inclined to darker explanations, whispered that he was using some form of ancient magic, or that he had made a pact with unseen forces who aided him in the night. The legend of the strange, quiet little man who could command stone began to grow, passed around in hushed tones in the local general stores and on dusty front porches. Ed himself did little to dispel these fantastical rumors. In fact, he seemed to enjoy them. If anyone was bold enough to ask him directly how he was building his incredible creation, he would be polite but maddeningly evasive, offering cryptic, koan-like answers such as, "It's not difficult if you know how." He was not just building a castle. In the process, he was consciously and masterfully building his own myth. The physical tools he used only deepened the mystery. In an age of burgeoning industrial power, Ed had no access to modern cranes, powerful electric saws, or any of the heavy machinery one would absolutely expect for such a monumental project. Instead, he employed a collection of simple, often handmade implements that seemed to belong to a bygone era. He was a master of improvisation, fashioning tools from the discarded remains of an old car, creating specialized chisels and levers from scrap metal. His most prominent and most photographed piece of equipment was a large tripod, constructed from 3 sturdy wooden poles, which were likely scavenged telephone poles, all bound together at the top. From this apex hung a system of chains and a simple block and tackle pulley system. To any qualified engineer, this rudimentary setup would seem woefully, almost laughably, inadequate for lifting objects that weighed significantly more than a car. Yet this was all anyone ever saw him use. He was either a genius of simple mechanics, pushing them to their absolute theoretical limits, or the tools themselves were a form of misdirection, a simple facade hiding a much more profound secret. He was a one-man construction quarryman, sculptor, engineer, and mason, erecting his masterpiece with a level of patience and solitary dedication that is almost impossible for us to comprehend today. He worked for nearly 3 decades, a silent symphony of one man's labor, shaping an entire world out of solid rock, all of it fueled by the fading, yet ever-present, memory of a love he had lost half a lifetime ago. The final result of this secret, nocturnal labor, is nothing short of breathtaking, a surreal and beautiful anomaly in the Florida landscape. The sheer scale of the achievement is staggering. Coral Castle is composed of an estimated 1,100 tons of coral rock. To truly grasp that figure, that's over 2 million pounds of stone, more than the weight of a dozen adult blue whales, all quarried, carved, and moved by one small, 100-pound man. But the castle isn't just a random pile of rocks. It's a complex, intricately designed and artfully arranged structure. Massive walls, constructed from perfectly fitted blocks weighing several tons each, encircle the property, creating a private, secluded world. These blocks are fitted together with such astonishing precision that they use no mortar, a dry-fit technique that is famously reminiscent of the ancient Incan builders of Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman in Peru. Inside these formidable walls lies a whimsical world carved entirely from stone. There are stone rocking chairs, each weighing hundreds of pounds, yet so perfectly balanced that they move with a gentle, rhythmic push. Dominating the courtyard is a magnificent, heart-shaped table which Ed called the Feast of Love, tablia direct and poignant tribute to his lost Agnes. He created stone beds, a stone fountain that once worked, and even a stone bathtub. He was meticulously creating a home, a complete domestic space, out of the hardest and coldest of materials, a strange and unforgiving home that he knew, in his heart, he would forever occupy alone. But the true marvels of his mysterious engineering genius are found in the more ambitious and technical pieces. The most famous of these, and the one that has baffled professional engineers for decades, was the 9-ton gate. This colossal, single slab of coral rock, which served as the main entrance to the castle, was so perfectly and impossibly balanced that it could be swung open with the light touch of a single finger. A small child could operate it with ease. It pivoted on a simple metal shaft, likely a repurposed truck axle, which was set within a hand-drilled hole at the stone's exact center of gravity. The precision required to find that perfect balance point on an irregularly shaped, 9-ton block of rock is a feat of engineering that remains difficult to explain even with modern technology. Beyond the gate, Ed's genius extended to the heavens above. He carved a massive Polaris telescope, a long, angled stone tube that was perfectly and permanently aligned with the North Star, allowing him to track the slow, steady movement of the stars and the passage of time. He also created an incredibly accurate sundial, capable of telling the time and date to within just a few minutes. These celestial instruments are a powerful statement. They show that Ed was not just a laborer. He was a thinker, an amateur astronomer, a man deeply connected to the cosmos and to the ancient, sacred traditions of aligning monumental structures with the stars, just like the anonymous builders of Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The legend of Ed Leedskalnin and his incredible creation might have ended there, a static monument in the quiet town of Florida City. But the story takes one final, even more impossible turn. By the mid-1930s, the outside world was beginning to encroach on Ed's carefully guarded sanctuary. A new subdivision was being planned nearby, and the thought of prying eyes, noisy neighbors, and the disruption of his solitude threatened the very essence of his private world. He decided he had to move. But he wasn't just going to abandon his life's work. In an act of will and labor that defies all logic, Ed decided to move the entire castle, all 1,100 tons of it. He found a new, more isolated plot of land 10 miles away, in what is now the city of Homestead, Florida. And then, over a period of time, working alone and at night as always, he single-handedly dismantled, transported, and meticulously reassembled his entire creation. This final act is perhaps the most inexplicable chapter in his entire story. How did one man move these multi-ton blocks 10 miles down the road? The most popular and compelling account of this incredible feat comes from a local trucker who claimed to have been hired by Ed for the job. The story goes that Ed's instructions were bizarre. He told the driver to bring his empty flatbed truck to the castle site in the evening and then leave immediately. He was explicitly told not to stay and watch. The driver, being paid for his time and likely intrigued by the strange request, did as he was told. When he returned the next morning, he was stunned to find his truck loaded with several massive, multi-ton blocks of coral, all perfectly positioned and balanced for transport. The trucker simply drove the load to the new site, unloaded it, and the mysterious process was repeated night after night until the entire castle had been moved. The driver swore he never once saw Ed load or unload the stones. He just saw the impossible result of a night's secret labor. It was as if the stones had moved themselves onto the truck, commanded by an unseen force. This impossible move solidified Ed's legendary status in the local community. He wasn't just a man who could carve and lift stone. He was a man who could transport it over vast distances, as if it were made of lightweight cardboard. He had moved his entire world, his heavy stone heart, to a new location, preserving its magic and deepening its mystery for all time. This is the legend of Ed and his stone garden, a story born from a broken heart, built in absolute secrecy, and culminating in a feat of labor and logistics that, to this day, no one can fully and satisfactorily explain. It stands as a silent, powerful question mark, etched forever in the sun-baked landscape of Florida. While the legend of Ed Leedskalnin's heartbroken devotion provides the undeniable soul of the Coral Castle story, giving it a poignant and human core, it is the cold, hard, and deeply perplexing engineering problems that truly elevate it from a curious local tale into one of the most baffling and enduring mysteries of the modern age. When we intentionally move past the romantic whispers of magic and heartache, we are left standing before a series of immense physical challenges that seem to openly defy the known laws of physics and push far beyond the established limits of a single man's capability. This is not a matter of interpreting folklore or analyzing a myth. It is a direct, tangible confrontation with the fundamental principles of engineering, a physical puzzle that has left seasoned experts, credentialed scientists, and experienced architects scratching their heads in genuine bewilderment for nearly a century. To truly understand the profound depth of this enigma, we must meticulously break down the construction of Coral Castle into its fundamental stages. Each stage, from the very first cut into the bedrock to the final placement of a multi-ton monolith, presents a problem that, by all conventional logic and scientific understanding, should have been utterly impossible for one small, 100-pound man with a collection of primitive, handmade tools to solve. The mystery begins at the most basic level imaginable, the very act of freeing the stone from the earth. The first and most foundational engineering problem is the quarrying and subsequent carving of the stone itself. The material Ed chose, or rather, the material his land provided, was oolite limestone. This is a type of coral rock, a sedimentary stone common in South Florida, formed over millennia from the compressed skeletons of marine organisms. While it's certainly softer than ultra-hard rocks like granite or basalt, it is by no means a soft material. It is solid, dense, heavy rock. Ed quarried every single block for his creation directly on site, digging down into the solid bedrock that lay just beneath the thin layer of topsoil on his property. In today's world, quarrying operations of this scale are massive industrial undertakings. They would involve fleets of heavy machinery, industrial-grade diamond-tipped saws cooled by jets of water, powerful pneumatic drills, and sometimes even precisely controlled explosives to break the rock free from the earth. Ed Leedskalnin had none of these things. His toolset was shockingly, almost absurdly, rudimentary, consisting of basic hand tools that he often fashioned himself from the scrap parts of an old Ford car. Witnesses and the few photographs that exist from his time show him with a collection of simple chisels, heavy hammers, and metal wedges. That was it. The question, then, is staggering in its simplicity and its complexity. How did he manage to cut and extract blocks of stone weighing several tons each, and do it with such breathtaking precision? The cuts seen on the blocks at Coral Castle are remarkably, unnervingly clean and straight, appearing as if they were sliced by a powerful, modern machine. There are very few jagged edges, stress fractures, or the telltale signs of brute force shattering that one would expect from such primitive methods. He was somehow able to separate these colossal, multi-ton blocks from the living bedrock with an almost surgical neatness. The mainstream, conventional explanation suggests that he used an ancient and incredibly laborious technique known to civilizations like the Egyptians and the Romans. He would have likely hand-drilled a painstaking series of holes into the limestone, perfectly aligned along the line where he wanted the stone to break. Then, he would have hammered dry wooden wedges into these holes and soaked them with water, causing them to expand and exert immense, slow pressure. Alternatively, he could have used metal wedges, patiently and systematically tapping each one in sequence to create a growing fissure that would eventually, after countless hours, crack the stone along the desired line. While this method is theoretically possible, the sheer, astronomical amount of labor involved is difficult for a modern mind to fully comprehend. To quarry over 1,000 tons of rock in this manner would have required a lifetime of non-stop, grueling, back-breaking work, even for a dedicated team of strong, healthy men. For one small 100-pound man to accomplish this, working mostly at night and completely alone, is a feat of physical endurance that borders on the superhuman. Furthermore, his work didn't stop at just cutting out rough, rectangular blocks. He was also an artist. He carved them into intricate, often whimsical shapes. He created a full set of stone furniture, a collection of celestial instruments, and the massive, perfectly squared walls of his castle. The level of craftsmanship displayed is simply incredible for someone using such basic tools. He fashioned a crescent moon weighing several tons, a detailed representation of the planet Saturn, and other complex, symbolic designs. To achieve this level of detail and smoothness with simple hand tools would require the delicate skill of a master sculptor combined with the brute strength of a stonemason and the infinite patience of a Buddhist monk. Each individual piece would have taken months, if not years, of meticulous, repetitive chipping and sanding. The quarrying and carving process alone presents a significant and profound mystery, a testament to a level of singular dedication and physical output that seems to defy all reasonable human limits. But cutting the stone from the ground, as immense a challenge as it was only the first, and perhaps the easiest, part of the puzzle. The truly mind-bending, reality-questioning challenge came next, lifting it. This brings us to the second and most profound engineering problem of Coral Castle, the lifting and positioning of the massive blocks. This is the absolute central mystery, the core of the enigma, the question that has spawned countless theories, from lost ancient science to whispers of extraterrestrial help. The blocks that Ed moved were not small, manageable stones. The average weight of the blocks forming the castle walls is estimated to be around 5 to 6 tons each. For comparison, a large modern SUV weighs about 2.5 tons. The largest single stone on the property, the towering monolith that forms part of the northern wall, weighs an estimated 30 tons. That is 60,000 pounds, the equivalent weight of about 5 fully grown adult elephants. The question must be asked directly. How did a man who weighed only 100 pounds, a man you could easily lift and carry yourself, manage to hoist these gargantuan weights into the air and place them with the precision of a master watchmaker? The only piece of lifting equipment ever documented on the site was Ed's famous, almost iconic, tripod. It was made from 3 tall, thick wooden poles, likely scavenged telephone poles, bound together securely at the top. From this apex hung a system of heavy chains and a simple block and tackle, a device of pulleys and ropes designed to create mechanical advantage and reduce the force needed to lift a load. Ed also had a handmade winch that he would crank. To any modern engineer, crane operator, or construction foreman, this setup is almost laughably inadequate for the monumental task at hand. A wooden tripod of that nature, even if constructed from the strongest timber, would be under immense and dangerous strain trying to lift even a few tons. The legs would be at extreme risk of buckling or snapping, and the soft Florida ground beneath them could easily give way under the concentrated pressure. To lift 30 tons with such a device is considered, by today's engineering standards, to be physically impossible. The forces involved would have shattered the wood into splinters or uprooted the entire structure from the ground. Yet somehow he did it. The stones are there, standing tall and silent, as undeniable proof. This glaring contradiction has led to intense and fascinating speculation about what we didn't see. Was the tripod just a piece of clever misdirection, a decoy to make his work seem more conventional than it really was? Was it merely one component of a much more complex system that Ed cleverly concealed from view? Some theorists, leaning heavily on Ed's own cryptic statements about magnetism and cosmic forces, have proposed that he built some kind of powerful electromagnetic device that could levitate the stones or at least significantly reduce their effective weight. He would use his strange, box-like machine, the one he called his perpetual motion holder, to generate a powerful, localized field that counteracted gravity, allowing him to then guide the massive, nearly weightless blocks into place with only minimal physical effort. In this fascinating scenario, the tripod and chains were not used for lifting the full, crushing weight of the stones, but were merely for stabilizing and positioning them as they floated, ghost-like, into position. This theory, while sounding like something straight out of science fiction, is one of the few that attempts to provide a comprehensive explanation for how the seemingly impossible was made possible. Others have suggested more grounded, albeit still extraordinary, theories that stay within the realm of known physics. Perhaps Ed was an unparalleled, once-in-a-generation genius of leverage and counterweights. He may have devised an incredibly complex and ingenious system of ramps, rollers, and massive fulcrums, using the immense weight of some stones to help lift others in a delicate, dangerous ballet of mass and balance. He could have built these elaborate lifting mechanisms for each and every stone, and then, true to his secretive nature, completely dismantled them after each lift, leaving absolutely no trace of his true methods. This would have required a level of planning, foresight, and mechanical intuition that is arguably just as impressive and awe-inspiring as any fantastical anti-gravity device. But even these more rational theories begin to strain credulity when confronted with the sheer scale of the operation. The immense amount of time and labor required to construct and deconstruct such systems for over 1,000 tons of stone, all within the confined space of his property, presents a logistical nightmare of its own. Thus, The lifting of the stones remains the unyielding core of the Coral Castle enigma, a defiant and silent challenge to our modern understanding of what one person, armed with a secret, can truly achieve. The genius of Ed Leedskalnin's engineering, however, was not just about raw power and lifting immense weights. It was also about incredible, almost unbelievable, finesse and precision. This delicate mastery is most perfectly and famously embodied in the third major engineering problem, the legendary 9-ton gate. This single feature of Coral Castle has become almost as famous as the man himself, a symbol of his inexplicable talent. It was a single, massive slab of coral rock, weighing approximately 18,000 pounds, that served as the primary entrance to his stone kingdom. What made it so remarkable was not its immense size, but its flawless movement. The gate was so perfectly and impossibly balanced that it could be opened with the gentle, light push of a single finger. It moved with a silent, effortless, ethereal grace that seemed to defy its own immense weight. A small child could operate it with ease. This was not just a clever party trick, it was a public demonstration of absolute, uncompromising engineering mastery. The gate pivoted on a simple metal rod, thought to be a repurposed truck axle, which passed through a perfectly centered, hand-drilled hole in the stone. The entire secret to its magical movement lay in its perfect balance. Ed had somehow managed to find the exact, three-dimensional center of gravity of this irregularly shaped, 9-ton block of rock. The level of precision required to achieve this is simply astonishing. If he had been off in his calculations by even a fraction of an inch, the gate would have been unbalanced, creating immense friction and pressure on the pivot point, making it impossible to move without great and sustained force. He achieved this level of microscopic precision without the aid of modern computers, laser scanning equipment, or sophisticated measuring devices. He apparently did it with his eyes, his hands, and his mysterious, intuitive understanding of the laws of physics. The mystery of the gate deepened and was confirmed in 1986 when, after decades of flawless operation, it finally stopped working. The metal bearing it rested on had rusted through from years of Florida humidity. A team of professional engineers was called in to perform the repair. To do what one small man had done alone in the 1930s, they needed a massive 20-ton industrial crane just to lift the gate off its pivot. They brought in modern equipment and a team of credentialed experts. After they removed the gate, they were stunned to find the elegant simplicity of its design. Just a metal shaft fitted into a hole in the stone, resting on an old truck bearing. Despite all their modern knowledge and advanced technology, when they reinstalled the gate, they could not replicate Ed's perfect, magical balance. It no longer moved with the effortless touch of a finger. The secret, it seemed, had been lost. The undeniable fact that a team of modern engineers, armed with advanced equipment and computer-aided design, could not replicate what one man with handmade tools had achieved decades earlier, is perhaps the most compelling piece of physical evidence that Ed Leedskalnin possessed a form of knowledge, or a unique skill that has been tragically forgotten by the modern world. This glaring discrepancy leads us directly to the final, overarching engineering problem, one that ties all the others together into a single, frustrating knot: the almost complete and total lack of evidence. When we investigate a great historical feat of engineering, like the construction of the Hoover Dam or the Eiffel Tower, we typically look for a paper trail blueprints, architectural plans, mathematical calculations, or detailed project records. The builders of medieval cathedrals, ancient Roman aqueducts, and Egyptian pyramids all left behind clues, whether in written documents, detailed hieroglyphs, or even in the distinct tool marks left on the stones. With Ed Leedskalnin, there is an eerie, almost deafening void. No architectural blueprints or engineering schematics for Coral Castle have ever been discovered. He left behind no personal journals detailing his day-to-day construction methods, no notebooks filled with mathematical calculations, no instructional diagrams. All we have are his cryptic philosophical pamphlets on magnetism, which are more metaphysical than practical, and a few tantalizing, carefully staged photographs. These photos themselves are a crucial part of the mystery. They show Ed posing proudly with his simple tripod and basic tools, but they never, not once, show him in the actual act of lifting or moving a stone. It's as if he was deliberately and carefully creating a public narrative, showing the world the how, his simple, unassuming tools, while keeping the real secret of his methods completely hidden from view. This lack of evidence is so profound and so complete that it feels entirely intentional. It's not a case of records being accidentally lost or destroyed over time. It seems they never existed in the first place. This suggests one of two possibilities. Either Ed's methods were so deeply intuitive and ingrained in him that he didn't need to write them down, or they were so revolutionary and secret that he actively and methodically ensured that no trace of them would be left behind for others to find. He wanted the castle to be his enduring legacy, but he wanted the method to remain his eternal, untouchable secret. This deliberate obscurity forces us to confront an unsettling possibility that we are not just missing a piece of the puzzle, but that the puzzle was intentionally designed by its creator to be unsolvable. The lack of evidence is, in itself, the most powerful and compelling evidence of all evidence of a man who is not only a master builder, but also a master of mystery, a man who left behind a stone fortress of questions that still stands, unbreached and defiant, to this day. To truly delve into the profound enigma of Coral Castle, we must temporarily move beyond the cold, hard stones and the baffling engineering problems they so powerfully present. Our investigation must turn inward, shifting its focus from the creation to the creator. We must attempt to peer into the mind of the man who conceived of and built it all, Ed Leedskalnin himself. While he was a man of intense, almost pathological, privacy who guarded the secrets of his methods with his very life, he was not entirely silent on the matter. He left behind a fascinating, if frustrating, trail of intellectual breadcrumbs for future generations to follow. These are a series of cryptic clues, scattered across his peculiar self-published writings, his strange and unique inventions, and his direct, often perplexing, statements to the curious visitors who questioned him. These clues do not provide a straightforward, easy-to-follow blueprint for how he built the castle. Instead, they offer a tantalizing and disorienting glimpse into his unique worldview, a complex philosophy that seamlessly blended a renegade form of science, a deep-seated mysticism, and a profound, unshakable belief that he had single-handedly unlocked a fundamental secret of the universe. It is within these scattered fragments of his remarkable mind that the deepest and most compelling aspects of the Coral Castle mystery truly reside. The most concrete and accessible evidence we have of Ed's unconventional thought process comes from a series of pamphlets he wrote and sold to visitors for a small fee of 10 or 25 cents. These were not tourist brochures or simple souvenirs. They weren't construction manuals or engineering textbooks. Instead, they were nothing short of manifestos of his personal philosophy, a direct and audacious challenge to the very foundations of modern science. The most significant and most studied of these is a slim volume titled Magnetic Current. In this text, Ed lays out his grand, unified theory of the universe, a theory he believed superseded all others. With the confidence of a prophet, he boldly declares that all of modern science, particularly the academic understanding of electricity and magnetism, is fundamentally and hopelessly wrong. He dismissed the well-established concept of electrons with contempt, calling it a foolish and nonsensical idea. For Ed, the universe was not made of discrete, separate particles like protons and electrons. It was instead animated by a single, powerful, all-encompassing force, a dualistic magnetic current. He believed that everything in existence, from the largest, most distant star to the smallest grain of sand on a Florida beach, was composed of countless individual magnets, and that life, energy, and motion were all the result of the constant, unimpeded flow of these north and south pole monopole magnets through space. He described this primordial force in simple, almost poetic and childlike terms, which makes his ideas both accessible and deeply strange. He wrote about a current of magnetic energy that circulates constantly throughout the universe, a cosmic river originating from the north and south poles of the Earth, flowing out into space and back again. He was adamant that this current was a tangible, physical substance, not an abstract, invisible field of force as described by mainstream physics. He argued with unwavering certainty that if scientists could only cast off their flawed theories and understand how to properly harness and direct this ever-present, all-powerful stream of energy, they could achieve things that would seem incredible, even magical. He saw this magnetic current as the very lifeblood of the cosmos, the universal engine that drove everything from the spinning of galaxies to the beating of a human heart. His writings are notoriously dense, often difficult to follow, and written in a simple, self-taught style that mixes profound, challenging ideas with frequent grammatical and spelling errors. But the central message is crystal clear. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that he had discovered a fundamental law of nature that had been completely overlooked or tragically misunderstood by everyone else. This wasn't just an abstract theory for him to ponder. It was a practical, working knowledge. The powerful implication, though he never explicitly stated it in the pamphlets, is that this very understanding of magnetic current was the ultimate key to his astonishing ability to manipulate the massive stones of his castle. In his own mind, he wasn't defying the laws of physics. He was simply using the real laws of physics, a secret knowledge that made the impossible not just possible, but straightforward. This deeply held belief in a forgotten, powerful, and alternative science directly connects to the second major clue Ed left behind for us, his open and repeated claims that he had rediscovered the long-lost secrets of the ancient Egyptians. When visitors, their faces etched with awe and disbelief as they stood before his massive stone creations, would ask him how one man could possibly do all this, he would often respond with a knowing, enigmatic smile and say that he understood the techniques used by the men who built the Great Pyramids at Giza. This was not a casual remark or a flippant boast. It was a statement he made frequently and with great seriousness. He seemed to genuinely believe that he had, through his own solitary efforts, tapped into the very same well of esoteric knowledge that allowed ancient civilizations across the globe to erect their colossal and enduring monuments. For Ed, the pyramids were not built by vast armies of slaves engaged in centuries of brutal, backbreaking labor, as mainstream history suggests. He dismissed this popular idea as inefficient, illogical, and frankly, unimaginative. Instead, he was thoroughly convinced that the ancients possessed a sophisticated and highly advanced understanding of natural forces, likely the very same magnetic currents he wrote about in his pamphlets that allowed them to levitate or greatly reduce the weight of massive stones, rendering them easy to transport and position. By aligning himself with the legendary pyramid builders, Ed was doing something strategically profound. He was consciously placing himself within a hallowed lineage of secret knowledge keepers, a tradition of master builders stretching back to the dawn of civilization. He was suggesting that his work at Coral Castle was not an isolated anomaly, a strange quirk of a Florida eccentric, but a modern-day revival of a lost art, a forgotten science that had once been common knowledge among the great builders of antiquity. This audacious claim resonated deeply with the public and fueled much of the burgeoning mystery that surrounded him. It instantly transformed him from a mere eccentric into a potential, living link to a distant, almost magical past. The question became irresistible. Was it possible that this quiet, unassuming, heartbroken immigrant in Florida had somehow, through his private research and powerful intuition, stumbled upon a world-changing secret that had been lost for millennia? The idea is utterly tantalizing. It suggests that the knowledge to manipulate gravity and move immense objects with ease is not something to be invented in the distant future, but something to be rediscovered from our own distant past. For Ed, Coral Castle was his pyramid, a modern-day, small-scale Giza, a testament to the fact that this ancient power was not lost forever. He was the living proof that the secrets of the Egyptians were real, and he had single-handedly brought them back to life in the 20th century. Perhaps the most mysterious and physically tangible clue to Ed's secret knowledge could be found locked away from prying eyes in his small, cluttered worshipper room that served as the inner sanctum, the nerve center for his entire monumental operation. Here, amidst his simple, well-worn tools and piles of salvaged scrap metal, sat a strange and utterly fascinating device that he had constructed himself. It was a wheel, studded with numerous U-shaped and bar magnets, all arranged in a specific, deliberate, circular pattern. Attached to it was a hand crank. Ed called this peculiar device his perpetual motion holder. The name itself is incredibly provocative, immediately invoking the age-old, impossible dream of a machine that can run forever without any external source of energetic concept that has eluded inventors and scientists for centuries. While his machine clearly did not achieve true perpetual motion, it still required him to turn the crank to operate, claimed it served a much higher and more mysterious purpose. He believed this device was a unique type of generator, a machine specifically designed to tap into and harness the cosmic magnetic currents that he so passionately described in his pamphlets. The exact function of this strange machine remains a subject of intense and ongoing debate among researchers and theorists. It wasn't an engine in any conventional sense, and it didn't seem to power anything directly. To a modern observer, it looks like a crude, oversized alternator, a simple magnetic flywheel, or perhaps just a curious piece of kinetic sculpture. But to Ed, it was the absolute key to his abilities. Theorists have proposed that when he turned the crank, the specific, careful arrangement of the magnets created a powerful, focused field of electromagnetic energy. This field, they argue, could have been directed at the coral blocks, causing a phenomenon known as magnetic resonance, or even a form of localized anti-gravity. By tuning the frequency of his machine to the natural vibrational frequency of the stone, he might have been able to disrupt the powerful forces holding it to the earth, making it light enough to be moved with his simple tripod and system of pulleys. In this view, the perpetual motion holder was the secret weapon, the mysterious black box that powered all his impossible feats. He would bring it out at night, fire it up with a turn of the crank, and its strange, low hum would be the only sound as multi-ton blocks of stone floated, ghost-like, into place. Whether it was a true anti-gravity device or simply a physical representation of his complex theories, the machine stands as a silent, metallic testament to the strange and wonderful landscape of Ed Leedskalnin's mind. It was a piece of his secret that he, quite deliberately, left in plain sight for all to see, but none to understand. While his cryptic writings and his strange machine offer tantalizing, physical hints, perhaps the most frustrating and simultaneously fascinating clues came directly from Ed's own mouth. He was a man of very few words, but the words he did choose to speak were often meticulously layered with meaning, appearing both simple on the surface and deeply profound underneath. When confronted with direct questions about his methods from curious tourists or skeptical journalists, he never, not once, gave a straight, technical answer. He would expertly deflect, mystify, and offer responses that were more like Zen koans or philosophical riddles than practical explanations. His most famous and oft-quoted reply, the one that has come to define his legend, was, "It's not difficult if you know how." This short statement is a true masterpiece of evasion. It simultaneously acknowledges the incredible, almost supernatural nature of his work while casually dismissing it as simple, contingent only on the possession of a specific piece of knowledge, a knowledge that he, and perhaps only he, possessed. It's a statement that is at once both incredibly humble and breathtakingly arrogant. On other occasions, he would offer slightly more detail, but it was always carefully wrapped in the language of basic, almost childlike physics, as if explaining it to a student. He would say, with a knowing look, "I understand the laws of weight and leverage." To the average person, this sounded like a plausible, if incomplete, explanation. It seemed reasonable. But to a trained engineer or physicist, it was a gross and almost insulting oversimplification. The laws of weight and leverage, as we conventionally understand and apply them, could not possibly account for what he had done. It was as if he was using familiar, comforting words, but imbuing them with a completely different, secret meaning. When he said weight, did he mean the standard gravitational pull that we all learn about in school, or did he mean something else entirely, a mutable property of an object that could be manipulated and changed? When he said leverage, Was he talking about simple crowbars and wooden fulcrums, or was he referring to a kind of cosmic leverage, using the powerful magnetic forces of the Earth itself as his lever? These vague and purposefully mystical statements served only to build the wall of mystery around him even higher. They were a brilliant form of intellectual misdirection, a verbal sleight of hand. He would give people just enough of an answer to satisfy their immediate curiosity and send them away feeling they had learned something, but never enough to truly solve the puzzle. He was in complete and total control of his own narrative, his own legend. In the world of Coral Castle, he was the sole keeper of the secret, the high priest of his own stony religion, and he admitted no one else into the inner sanctum of his knowledge. By refusing to give a clear, verifiable explanation, he ensured that his legend would far outlive him. He seemed to understand a fundamental truth, that an unanswered question is far more powerful, compelling, and enduring than a solved problem. The Creator's own cryptic clues, when taken together, do not give us a final, satisfying answer. Instead, they deepen the enigma exponentially, painting a rich and complex portrait of a man who genuinely believed he was operating on a different plane of understanding than the rest of humanity. He left us not a solution, but a path of inquiry, a trail that leads us away from the safe, well-lit highways of conventional science and into a shadowy, mesmerizing world of ancient secrets, cosmic forces, and the truly limitless power of a single, obsessive, and brilliant mind. As the decades have passed since Ed Leedskalnin's death in 1951, the direct, first-hand knowledge of his astonishing methods has inevitably and irretrievably faded into the realm of legend. He was the sole keeper of his secret, and he took that secret with him to the grave, leaving behind a magnificent stone monument that functions less as a building and more as a giant, silent question mark etched into the Florida landscape. In the profound absence of a clear answer from the man himself, the world has been left to do what it does best when faced with the inexplicable, to speculate, to theorize, and to attempt to reverse engineer one of the most baffling and inspiring construction projects in all of modern history. This intellectual quest has given rise to a fascinating and diverse spectrum of modern theories, a collection of explanations that range from the deliberately mundane and stubbornly practical to the highly exotic, ethereal, and even supernatural. Each of these theories, in its own way, attempts to answer the central, burning question: was Ed Leedskalnin simply a master of clever illusions and a forgotten genius of conventional mechanics, or was he truly the keeper of a lost, powerful, and world-altering science? Exploring these possibilities takes us on a compelling journey to the very limits of our own understanding, forcing us to weigh the sober merits of scientific skepticism against the undeniable, magnetic allure of the unknown. The first, most grounded, and most scientifically conservative of these modern theories is the conventional engineering theory. This perspective makes a concerted effort to demystify Ed Leedskalnin, to methodically strip away the thick, enticing layers of magic, myth, and legend in order to reveal what its proponents believe is the simple, unadorned truth. Ed was not a mystic, a magician, or a wizard who could command stone with a whisper, but rather a self-taught, intensely practical, and once-in-a-millennium genius of conventional physics and mechanical engineering. This theory doesn't for a moment deny the incredible, almost unbelievable, nature of his achievement. It simply argues, with resolute conviction, that his feat was achieved through methods that, while brilliantly and obsessively applied, are entirely explainable by the known and established laws of science. The proponents of this sober view suggest that our modern inability to comprehend his accomplishment stems directly from our over-reliance on powered machinery and our disconnect from the fundamental principles of labor. We have, they argue, forgotten the immense, almost limitless, potential of simple mechanics, the humble power of levers, pulleys, counterweights, and rollers when they are applied with extraordinary patience, unparalleled ingenuity, and a lifetime of dedicated effort. According to this theory, Ed's famous and often photographed wooden tripod was not a clever decoy, as some suggest, but was in fact a key and central component of a highly sophisticated system of leverage. He would have used it not to directly lift the full, crushing weight of a multi-ton stone, but as a stable and powerful anchor point for a complex and meticulously arranged web of heavy chains and pulleys, creating an immense mechanical advantage that multiplied his own small force many times over. By using a long enough lever arm, perhaps a massive log or beam, a sufficient number of pulleys arranged in a block and tackle system, the amount of force required to lift an extremely heavy object can be reduced dramatically, down to a manageable level for a single person. It's a principle as old as the ancient Greek mathematician Archimedes, who famously and confidently boasted that with a lever long enough and a place to stand, he could move the entire world. Ed Leedskalnin, this theory argues, was a modern-day Archimedes, a man who had mastered these principles to an almost artistic degree. He would have spent hours, or perhaps even days, slowly, methodically, and painstakingly hoisting a single block, inch by agonizing inch, with a patience that borders on the divine. His small, 100-pound stature would not have been a significant hindrance if he had the right mechanical setup. He would only need to apply a small, steady, and consistent force over a very long period of time to achieve what seems, to our impatient eyes, to be impossible. This theory also posits that he made extensive and brilliant use of counterweights. He could have used previously quarried blocks, some weighing many tons, as a massive counterbalance to help lift new ones from the pit. By creating a gigantic, seesaw-like system with a heavy, finished block on one end of a massive log lever, he could have made the unquarried block on the other end significantly easier to manage and maneuver. He may have also used other ingenious, low-tech techniques, such as building and then removing temporary earthen ramps, allowing him to roll the stones into place on a series of smooth, well-greased logs, a method thought to have been used by ancient cultures around the world, from the builders of Stonehenge to the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island. He would have been an absolute master of friction, understanding exactly how to minimize it with water, grease, or polished surfaces to make the colossal stones move more easily. His secret, in this decidedly non-magical view, was not a mystical formula or an alien device, but a profound and deeply intuitive understanding of these basic physical principles, combined with a level of unwavering patience and sheer physical endurance that is almost unimaginable to us in our modern, convenience-driven world. The reason we can't figure it out, the skeptics say, is because we are looking for a single, complex, high-tech solution when the answer is one of simple, elegant, low-tech brilliance. The illusion of magic was created by his intense secrecy, the darkness in which he worked, and the general public's lack of understanding of just how powerful simple mechanics can be in the right hands. While the conventional engineering theory offers a rational, logical, and scientifically plausible explanation, for many it feels incomplete. It falls short of persuasively explaining the sheer, overwhelming scale and the apparent speed of Ed's work, especially the almost miraculous move of the entire 1,100-ton castle to Homestead. This perceived gap in explanation has led to the development of more exotic, more speculative, and far more intriguing theories. One of the most fascinating of these is the acoustic levitation hypothesis. This theory boldly steps into the realm of what might be called fringe science, proposing that Ed used the invisible but powerful force of sound to achieve his incredible feats. Acoustic levitation is a real, demonstrable scientific phenomenon, though typically it is only achieved on a very small and controlled scale in laboratory settings. The principle is that intense, focused sound waves can create a pressure differential in the air around an object, generating a force capable of suspending a small, lightweight item like a drop of water or a styrofoam ball in midair. The theory daringly suggests that Ed Leedskalnin discovered a way to amplify this principle to a monumental, earth-shaking scale. Proponents of this hypothesis point directly to the strange and consistent stories told by local children who spied on Ed. They claimed they heard him singing to the stones as he worked. Was this just an eccentric man humming to himself to pass the long, lonely hours of the night, or was he purposefully generating a specific, resonant frequency with his voice? The theory posits that every object in the universe, from a wine glass to a block of stone, has a natural resonant frequency, a specific pitch at which it will begin to vibrate with maximum amplitude. If Ed could somehow find the precise resonant frequency of the oolite limestone blocks, he could have used a sustained and powerful sound wave to cause them to vibrate intensely. At a certain amplitude, these powerful vibrations could theoretically disrupt the stone's connection to the Earth's gravitational field, making it significantly lighter and exponentially easier to move. He may not have been fully levitating the stones like floating balloons, but perhaps he was making a 30-ton block feel as if it weighed only a few hundred pounds, bringing it within the realm of what a simple tripod could manage. The strange device he called his perpetual motion holder could have played a key role in this sonic process. Instead of being a magnetic generator, perhaps it was a powerful sonic one. The spinning wheel and the carefully arranged magnets might have been designed not to create an electrical current, but a powerful, low-frequency human infrasound that was below the range of normal human hearing, but was immensely powerful in its physical effect. This would elegantly explain why neighbors reported hearing only faint, distant sounds of work. The true, earth-shaking power was being generated at a frequency they simply couldn't perceive. This theory is especially compelling because it aligns perfectly with ancient myths and legends from cultures all around the world, from the biblical stories of the walls of Jericho falling to the sound of trumpets, to the mystical Tibetan tales of monks being able to levitate massive stones with the focused sound of chanting and horns. It suggests that Ed had stumbled upon an ancient, forgotten art, a form of sonic technology that our modern science is only just beginning to tentatively understand. It paints a picture of a man not just as a builder, but as a master conductor, orchestrating a silent symphony of vibrations to command the very earth beneath his feet. Building directly upon Ed's own mysterious writings and his obsession with cosmic forces, we arrive at the third and perhaps most popular and enduring of the unconventional theories, the anti-gravity and electromagnetism theory. This line of thinking makes the bold move of taking Ed completely at his word. It assumes that his pamphlets on magnetic current were not just the philosophical ramblings of an uneducated eccentric, but a genuine, if cryptic and coded, explanation of his actual methods. This theory suggests that Ed Leedskalnin had designed and built a device capable of generating a powerful, localized electromagnetic field that could disrupt, divert, or effectively neutralize the force of gravity in its immediate vicinity. His perpetual motion holder was, in this view, the literal heart of this anti-gravity machine. It was not creating perpetual motion, but was instead tapping into the Earth's own powerful, ever-present magnetic field, channeling and manipulating it to create a concentrated, spinning bubble of energy. The specific location of Coral Castle might have been absolutely crucial to this process. South Florida is known by geologists for its unique geological and electromagnetic properties. It has a relatively thin crust and lies within a region that experiences occasional and unexplained magnetic anomalies. Did Ed, through his years of wandering and solitary research, specifically choose this location because he knew its unique properties were ideal for his experiments? Proponents of this theory believe so. They argue that he was able to use his machine to create a powerful torsional field, a spinning vortex of energy that would effectively shield the coral blocks from the full pull of Earth's gravity. In this scenario, the famous tripod and chains were, as many have long suspected, merely for guidance, to gently nudge and position the now nearly weightless stones into their final resting place with pinpoint accuracy. This theory is undoubtedly the most sci-fi of the mainstream explanations, but it is also the one that most closely and elegantly aligns with the strange clues and direct evidence that Ed himself provided. This theory also helps to plausibly explain the incredible and otherwise inexplicable move to Homestead. If he possessed a portable anti-gravity device, the daunting 10-mile journey would have been far less of a challenge. He could have made the multi-ton blocks effectively weightless, allowing them to be loaded onto a simple flatbed truck without the need for any kind of crane or heavy machinery. It would perfectly explain why the truck driver never saw him load the stones. The process would have been silent, quick, and to any observer, would have looked utterly and completely magical. It also provides a powerful and poignant potential explanation for his lifelong secrecy. If he had truly discovered a way to manipulate and neutralize gravity, he would have possessed a technology of almost unimaginable power, a technology that could revolutionize the world for the better, but could also be used for terrifyingly destructive purposes. He may have kept his discovery a secret not out of selfishness or spite, but out of a profound and heavy sense of responsibility, fearing how such a powerful technology would be immediately exploited by governments and corporations. In this light, he becomes not just a heartbroken builder, but a noble and solitary guardian of a powerful and potentially dangerous secret. Ultimately, all of these compelling theories, from the most staunchly practical to the most wildly fantastic, lead us back to the same profound and perhaps unsolvable final question. Regardless of which method he used, whether it was ingenious leverage, sonic resonance, or electromagnetic anti-gravity, it is undeniable that Ed Leedskalnin possessed a form of knowledge or skill that was truly extraordinary. The final and deepest mystery of Coral Castle, therefore, is not just how he did it, but why he chose to take that incredible knowledge with him to the grave. If he was simply a brilliant conventional engineer, why not write a book explaining his revolutionary techniques of leverage and counterweighting? It would have brought him immense fame and fortune. If he had discovered a new and revolutionary scientific principle, like acoustic levitation or magnetic anti-gravity, why not share it with the world for the betterment of all humanity? The answer, most likely, lies not in the stones or the tools, but in the very nature of the man himself. He was a recluse, a man who had been deeply and fundamentally wounded by the world and had consequently retreated into a private, self-sufficient universe of his own making. Perhaps he felt that the world, the same world that had so cruelly rejected him, was not worthy of his secrets. His creation was, at its core, a deeply personal statement, a private monument to a lost love, and its secrets were an integral part of its sacredness. To share them would be to profane his private temple and expose his vulnerable heart once more. Or perhaps, more altruistically, he feared that his discovery, if revealed, would be misunderstood, ridiculed by mainstream science, or worse, stolen and weaponized by the powerful. He may have seen himself as the sole guardian of a powerful and delicate truth, deciding that it was safer for it to die with him than to fall into the wrong hands. His silence, in this sense, becomes his final and most profound act of engineering. He engineered not just a castle of stone, but a perfect and everlasting mystery. The unsolvable nature of Coral Castle is its ultimate, crowning feature, the final, invisible stone he laid in place. He left behind a legacy that forces us to question the very limits of our own knowledge, a timeless and beautiful puzzle that continues to inspire awe, wonder, and an enduring sense that there are still great and powerful secrets hidden just beneath the surface of our world, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. Today, Coral Castle is a popular tourist attraction, but the central mystery remains untouched. Was Ed Leedskalnin just a lonely genius who mastered simple physics to an unbelievable degree? Or did he truly rediscover a lost science, an ancient secret that allowed him to bend the laws of nature to his will? The stones of his castle stand silent, holding a secret that continues to challenge our understanding of what is possible. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. What mystery should we unravel next? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep digging into history's secrets together. Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover hidden histories, lost artifacts, and ancient mysteries. Join us as we explore the past secrets. Subscribe and dive into history's untold stories. It is perhaps the most controversial religious relic in the world, a long linen cloth bearing the faint, ghostly image of a crucified man. Millions believe this is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus Christ, a miraculous image created at the moment of resurrection. But science tells a different story. Today, we unravel the mystery of the Shroud of Turin, a story of faith, science, and a single piece of cloth that continues to divide the world. To truly begin our journey into the profound and labyrinthine mystery of the Shroud of Turin, it is essential that we first momentarily set aside the heated, often polarizing, debates about its age, and its origin. Before we can even begin to ask the complex questions of when it was made, or, more contentiously, how it was made, we must first address a more fundamental and objective question. What are we actually looking at? We must become neutral observers, examining the object itself as a standalone artifact. The shroud is a long, rectangular piece of ancient linen cloth, measuring approximately 14 feet 3 inches in length and 3 feet 7 inches in width. The fabric itself is woven in a distinctive and high-quality 3-to-1 herringbone twill pattern, a type of weave that, while not common, was certainly known in antiquity and the Middle East in the 1st century. For centuries, this singular piece of cloth has been meticulously preserved, protected from the elements, and deeply venerated as a sacred object. But what elevates it from a mere historical textile into arguably the most famous, most studied, and most controversial relic in the entire world is the faint, ghostly, and deeply mysterious image that is imprinted upon its surface. This is not just a piece of ancient cloth, it is a canvas bearing a full-size, detailed, and profoundly perplexing human portrait. To look upon the shroud is to look directly upon an enigma, an image that has been subjected to decades of intense scrutiny by scientists, historians, forensic pathologists, and theologians, and one that, with every new layer of study, seems to reveal more questions than it provides answers. The first and most immediately striking feature of the shroud is the nature of the image itself. It is a faint, monochromatic, sepia-toned impression, almost like a faded old photograph depicting the full-length frontal and dorsal views of a naked man. The figure is bearded, with long hair parted in the middle, and appears to be in a state of solemn, peaceful repose, as if laid out for burial. The two images, the frontal and the dorsal, are laid out head-to-head along the length of the cloth, their arrangement perfectly consistent with how a body would be placed in a single, long burial sheet that was then folded over the head, enveloping the corpse from front and back. But this is not a painting or a drawing in any conventional sense that we understand from the history of art. When the image is examined up close, even under high magnification, there are no visible brushstrokes, no telltale outlines, and no directionality to the application of color, as one would absolutely expect to find from an artist's hand. The image appears to be a surface phenomenon of extraordinary and almost unbelievable subtlety. Decades of scientific analysis have shown that the faint coloration that forms the image is the result of a chemical chain dehydration and oxidation of the linen fibers themselves. This change penetrates only the very top microfibers of the linen threads to a depth of only a few hundred nanometers, which is thinner than the wavelength of visible light. It's as if the image has been delicately and precisely scorched or chemically aged onto the cloth, but with a level of control and precision that is incredibly difficult to explain. It is not a stain that is soaked into the fabric, nor is it a substance like paint or powder that has been added on top of it. It is an intrinsic alteration of the linen itself, a faint, ghostly portrait that seems to hover weightlessly on the very surface of the cloth, making it incredibly difficult to see clearly with the naked eye from a distance, and even more difficult to explain its formation through any known natural or artificial means. What transforms this faint, mysterious portrait from a mere historical or artistic curiosity into one of the most powerful and sacred objects in Christendom is the second, and most compelling, aspect of the image: the detailed, systematic, and anatomically precise depiction of wounds that are strikingly and disturbingly consistent with the gospel accounts of the suffering and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The man on the shroud is not a man who died peacefully in his sleep. He is unequivocally a man who died a brutal, prolonged, and violent death. The image reveals a comprehensive litany of injuries that read like a cold, dispassionate forensic report of the Passion narrative. Across the entire back, from the shoulders down to the calves, and wrapping around the front of the chest, there are dozens upon dozens, over 100 by some counts, off small, dumbbell-shaped marks, often appearing in groups of 2 or 3. These marks are perfectly consistent with the unique wounds that would be inflicted by a Roman flagrum, a fearsome type of scourge or whip with multiple leather thongs, each tipped with small, sharp pieces of lead or bone, specifically designed to bite into and tear the flesh. The number, Pattern and placement of these wounds suggest a severe and prolonged scourging, likely administered by two soldiers of different heights, one on either side of the victim. A detail explicitly mentioned in the Gospels as occurring before Jesus was led to his crucifixion. The specific wounds of the crucifixion itself are also depicted with a stark, unflinching, and unsettling realism. On the feet, and most significantly on the wrists, there are distinct, circular puncture wounds surrounded by darker stains that appear to be blood flows, dictated by gravity. The placement of the nail wound in the wrist, rather than in the palm of the hand, as is almost universally shown in traditional religious art for centuries, is a point of significant and profound historical and anatomical accuracy. Modern medical experiments have confirmed that a nail driven through the soft tissue of the palm would not be able to support the weight of a body on a cross. The flesh would simply tear through. However, a nail driven through the wrist, in a specific anatomical location known as descent space, would pass between the carpal bones, be able to lock the hand securely to the crossbeam, and easily support the body's weight, while also potentially damaging the median nerve, which would cause the thumb to contract sharply into the palm, a detail that is also consistent with the image on the shroud, where the thumbs are not visible. This is a level of detailed anatomical knowledge that many historians and medical experts argue would have been completely unknown to a typical medieval artist, who would have almost certainly followed the established, though anatomically incorrect, nails in the palms iconography. Furthermore, on the right side of the man's chest, between the fifth and sixth ribs, there is a large, elliptical wound, consistent in size and shape with that of a Roman lancea, or spear. This wound aligns perfectly with the unique account in the Gospel of John, which describes a Roman soldier piercing Jesus' side with a spear after his death to confirm that he had expired. The apparent flows of blood and a separate, watery fluid from this wound also align precisely with the biblical description of blood and water pouring forth. These detailed, anatomically precise, and forensically consistent wounds create a powerful, silent, and deeply disturbing testimony, a visual narrative of immense suffering that aligns, point by point, with the story at the very heart of the Christian faith. This overwhelming sense of brutal, unflinching realism is further enhanced by the unique and terrifying nature of the wounds seen on the figure's head. For centuries, Christian religious art has depicted Jesus' crown of thorns as a neat, almost decorative, circlet-like wreath, a halo of briars resting gently on his brow. The image on the Shroud of Turin, however, tells a different and far more gruesome story. Instead of a simple, orderly circlet, the head of the man on the shroud shows numerous small but distinct puncture wounds covering the entire scalp, from the forehead, across the top, and down to the back of the head. This pattern strongly suggests that the crown was not a delicate wreath at all, but a cruel, cap-like helmet of thorns, likely fashioned from a type of thorny plant native to the Middle East, that was viciously forced down onto the head, causing dozens of small, deep wounds and extensive bleeding from the highly vascular scalp. Many historians and forensic experts believe this is a much more realistic and historically accurate depiction of the type of sadistic mockery and improvised torture that Roman soldiers would have inflicted upon a man they were deriding as the King of the Jews. Once again, this is a stark detail that runs completely contrary to centuries of established artistic tradition. It suggests that the image on the shroud is not a copy of other religious art, but is instead a primary source of information, a raw, unfiltered, and brutal depiction of a real historical event. For hundreds of years, the shroud was venerated as a holy object, but the full, astonishing, and truly mind-bending nature of its image remained hidden in plain sight. The true, paradigm-shifting mystery was unlocked, quite by accident, in the year 1898. An Italian lawyer and amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was granted official permission to take the first-ever photograph of the shroud during a public exhibition. He set up his large, cumbersome, late 19th century camera equipment in the Turin Cathedral, and with great reverence and professional care, he took a picture of the ancient linen cloth. It was later that night, in the dim, eerie, red light of his darkroom, that the bombshell discovery was made. As he watched the image slowly materialize on the large glass photographic plate during the developing process, he was stunned, almost to the point of physical shock. The image appearing on the photographic negative, which, by its very nature, reverses all light and dark areas, was not a confusing, ghostly, and abstract negative. Instead, the negative plate revealed a clear, detailed, and strikingly lifelike positive portrait of a man's face. The face that stared back at him was noble, with a serene and dignified expression, a long nose, and deep-set, haunting eyes. The logic was immediate, inescapable, and profound. If the photographic negative produced a positive image, then the original image on the shroud itself had to be, in essence, a perfect photographic negative. This singular discovery changed everything about how the shroud was understood. It meant that the shroud was not just a faint, artistic impression, it was a highly complex and scientifically encoded image. The darker parts of the image on the cloth, such as the hair and beard, became light on the negative, and the lighter parts became dark, creating a naturalistic, nuanced, and three-dimensional appearance that was previously hidden. This immediately raised an incredible and seemingly unanswerable question. How could a medieval artist, working centuries before the invention of photography and with absolutely no concept of a photographic negative, have possibly created such an image? It seemed to defy all known artistic and scientific techniques of the period. This unique property also allowed modern scientists to analyze the image in revolutionary new ways. When a photograph of the shroud image is processed with a device like the VP-8 image analyzer, a device famously used by NASA to map the topography of planets from satellite photos, it reveals encoded, three-dimensional information. The intensity of the image, how dark or light it is, correlates directly to the distance between the body and the cloth. Darker parts of the image correspond to parts of the body that would have been closer to the cloth, like the tip of the nose, and lighter parts correspond to areas further away, like the recesses of the eyes. This suggests the image was formed by some process that was exquisitely sensitive to the distance between the body and the cloth, a property that artists and scientists have never been able to replicate in any attempted forgery. The photographic negative quality of the shroud remains one of its most profound, enduring, and scientifically inexplicable characteristics. The final, crucial layer of this enigmatic portrait is the presence of what appear to be real blood stains, which are chemically and physically distinct from the faint, sepia-toned body image. Superimposed on top of the figure, particularly around the areas of the major wounds on the head, wrists, feet, and side, are darker, reddish-brown stains that have the appearance of blood. When analyzed, these stains behave very differently from the body image. They are not superficial. They appear to have soaked into and wicked along the linen fibers, consistent with the real liquid being absorbed by cloth. They do not contain the strange 3D information that the body image does, suggesting they were formed by a completely different process, most likely direct physical contact between a bleeding body and the linen. Most compellingly, detailed forensic analysis conducted by the STURP team and other independent researchers has suggested that these stains are consistent with real, type AB human blood. The tests have been controversial and are still debated, but many scientists in the field stand by the results. The stains show positive results for hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in the blood, and for albumin, a protein found in blood serum. Furthermore, many of the larger stains exhibit a clear and distinct serum ring, a faint, watery halo around the main, darker stain. This is exactly what happens when blood from a wound separates into a darker clot of red blood cells and a lighter, watery serum as it dries on a cloth surface. This is a subtle forensic detail that would have been almost impossible for a medieval forger to know about, let alone to replicate, with remarkable accuracy using artistic pigments. These bloodstains provide a final, grim layer of profound realism to the image, suggesting that the cloth was not just imprinted with a mysterious, ethereal image, but was also in direct, physical contact with a severely wounded and bleeding human body. Together, these 5 distinct and extraordinary elements, the faint, superficial, chemically altered image, the detailed and forensically accurate wounds of the Passion, the historically plausible helmet-like crown of thorns, the inexplicable and anachronistic photographic negative properties, and the forensically consistent blood stains create a powerful and deeply challenging puzzle. The image on the Shroud of Turin is not a simple picture. It is a complex, multi-layered, and scientifically rich data set that has, so far, defied every single attempt at a complete and satisfactory explanation, whether by the principles of faith or the rigors of science. The mysterious and compelling image on the Shroud of Turin, with its inexplicable photographic negative properties and its starkly, forensically accurate wounds, presented a profound and multifaceted challenge that seemed to transcend the traditional boundaries of historical or artistic analysis. For many centuries, the intense debate surrounding the Shroud had been largely confined to the realms of theology, personal faith, and historical speculation. But in the 20th century, with its explosion of technological advancement, a new and powerful voice entered the conversation, a voice that promised objectivity, precision, and definitive answers, the voice of modern science. The Shroud, for the first time in its long and storied history, was about to be subjected to a level of intense, empirical scrutiny that its previous guardians could never have possibly imagined. The central question of the debate shifted dramatically, moving from the subjective, what does it look like, to the objective, what is it made of, and more importantly, how old is it? This new, scientific line of inquiry led to a series of groundbreaking investigations that would ultimately culminate in a single, bombshell result verdict that promised to solve the mystery once and for all, but in reality, would only add new and even more complex layers to this enduring and captivating enigma. The first major, organized scientific assault on the mystery of the Shroud took place in the autumn of 1978. A highly respected team of scientists, mostly from the United States, formed a group that came to be known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP. It is crucial to understand that this was not a team of religious zealots or amateur enthusiasts with a preconceived agenda. It was a serious, multidisciplinary group of credentialed physicists, analytical chemists, optical scientists, and professional imaging specialists, many of whom worked at prestigious and highly secure institutions like the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the Sandia National Laboratories, and the U.S. Air Force Academy. After years of careful and patient negotiation with the Vatican and the House of Savoy, they were granted unprecedented, direct, hands-on access to the Shroud itself. For 5 consecutive days and nights, a total of 120 continuous hours working around the clock in a specially prepared, sterile room in the Royal Palace of Turin, the STURP team subjected the ancient linen cloth to a comprehensive battery of non-destructive tests. They brought with them over 70 crates of state-of-the-art equipment, using techniques such as infrared and ultraviolet spectroscopy, X-ray fluorescence, thermography, and advanced photomicroscopy. Their goal was singular and scientific, to gather as much physical and chemical data as possible to determine the properties of the image and to identify what, exactly, had created it. After years of meticulously analyzing the immense amount of data they had collected during that intense 5-day period, the STURP team published their final, peer-reviewed conclusions in 1981, and their findings were nothing short of stunning. They systematically and scientifically ruled out almost every known method of artistic production, both ancient and modern. They concluded, with a high degree of scientific certainty, that the image was not a painting. Exhaustive analysis found no traces of paint pigments, inks, dyes, or stains in sufficient quantity to account for the formation of the image. They determined that it was not a scorch created by a hot object like a heated statue or a bas-relief, as the heat required would have damaged the delicate linen fibers in ways that were not observed, and would not have produced the unique, superficial coloration. They concluded it was not a rubbing, as that would have distorted the weave of the cloth and left a directional residue. Their final summary stated, with remarkable clarity, "We can conclude for now that the Shroud image is that of a real human form of a scourged, crucified man. It is not the product of an artist." The blood stains are composed of hemoglobin and also give a positive test for serum albumin. And most famously, they ended their official report with a statement of profound scientific humility. The question of how the image was produced or what produced the image remains, now, as it has in the past, a mystery. This landmark scientific investigation, which was intended to find a rational, naturalistic explanation, had only deepened the enigma. By scientifically proving what the image wasn't, they had made the question of what it was even more perplexing and profound. The STIRP project left the world with a scientifically verified paradox, a highly detailed, three-dimensional image of a man with real human blood, but with no discernible cause. In the wake of the stunning and inconclusive STIRP findings, the pressure from the global scientific community for one final, decisive test began to mount. There was one well-established scientific method that promised to bypass all the complex and confusing questions of chemistry and image formation, a method that could provide a direct, chronological answer to the ultimate question of origin: radiocarbon dating. Carbon-14 dating is a widely accepted and highly accurate method for determining the age of organic materials. The science is based on a simple principle: all living things, from people to plants, absorb carbon from the atmosphere, including a tiny, predictable amount of the naturally occurring radioactive isotope carbon-14. When an organism, such as the flax plant used to make the shroud's linen, is harvested and dies, it stops absorbing carbon. From that moment on, the carbon-14 it has already accumulated begins to decay into nitrogen-14 at a known, constant rate, with a half-life of approximately 5,730 years. By measuring the amount of carbon-14 remaining in an ancient organic sample, scientists can calculate how long it has been since the organism died and thus accurately determine the age of the material. For many years, the Vatican, as the shroud's ultimate guardian, had been understandably reluctant to permit this test. The primary reason was that the carbon dating technology of the time required a relatively large sample of material to be burned and destroyed in order to get an accurate reading sample the size of a handkerchief, something they were unwilling to do to such a precious and unique relic. However, by the late 1980s, a new, much more sensitive and refined technique called accelerator mass spectrometry, AMS, had been perfected. This new method was revolutionary because it required a sample that was thousands of times smaller than what was previously needed, a tiny piece of cloth no bigger than a postage stamp. The pressure from the scientific community for a definitive dating of the shroud became immense and impossible to ignore. Finally, in 1988, after a period of careful consideration and extensive international consultation, the Vatican, with the approval of Pope John Paul II, gave its historic permission. This was to be the definitive test, the scientific moment of truth that would, it was hoped, settle the debate for the Shroud of Turin once and for all. The entire process was meticulously designed to be as transparent, rigorous, and scientifically sound as possible, in order to avoid any future accusations of fraud, error, or conspiracy. In April of 1988, in a brightly lit room in the Turin Cathedral, filled with official witnesses including the Archbishop of Turin, textile experts, and representatives from the designated scientific laboratory, a small sample was carefully and precisely cut from a single corner of the main shroud cloth. The entire procedure was filmed, photographed, and meticulously documented from start to finish. This tiny, unassuming sliver of ancient linen, it was believed, held the key to unlocking a centuries-old mystery. To ensure the absolute accuracy, integrity, and impartiality of the results, the sample was not sent to just one laboratory. It was carefully divided into 3 smaller pieces and prepared for seal distribution to 3 of the world's top and most respected radiocarbon dating laboratories, each one a leader in the field of AMS technology. One sample was destined for the University of Oxford in England, another for the prestigious Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, in Zurich, Switzerland, and the third for the University of Arizona in Tucson, in the United States. To further guarantee the impartiality of the test and prevent any potential bias, the laboratories were, at least initially, not officially told that the sample they were receiving was from the famous Shroud of Turin. For them, it was just another ancient textile sample. It was a blind test. Along with the shroud sample, they were also given several control samples, other ancient textiles with well-documented historical ages to date simultaneously, a standard scientific practice to ensure that their equipment and procedures were perfectly calibrated and functioning correctly. The scientific world, the religious world, and indeed the entire global community held its collective breath. After decades of intense speculation, a definitive, chronological answer was finally within reach. The labs conducted their work independently and diligently over the next several months, each using their own highly advanced AMS equipment to meticulously count the individual carbon atoms in their tiny, precious samples. Several months later, the results from all three independent laboratories were sent under seal to the British Museum in London for official collation and statistical analysis. The findings were unambiguous, remarkably consistent, and to the millions of believers around the world who had prayed for a different outcome, utterly and completely devastating. The official report from the laboratory at the University of Arizona dated the sample to the year 1350, plus or minus 60 years. The report from the University of Oxford laboratory dated it to the year 1295, plus or minus 65 years. And the report from the laboratory in Zurich dated it to the year 1325, plus or minus 95 years. When all the data from the three independent tests was combined and calibrated, the final statistical conclusion was clear, powerful, and scientifically unassailable. The three independent, world-class laboratories all agreed. With a 95% confidence level, the linen of the Shroud of Turin was definitively dated to a period between the years 1260 and 1390 AD. This result was a scientific bombshell of the highest order. It placed the origin of the shroud squarely and firmly in the High Middle Ages, more than 12 centuries after the time of Christ. The linen itself, according to this data, was not a first-century burial cloth from ancient Judea. It was a medieval textile. The official scientific conclusion, announced by Cardinal Balestrero at a packed and highly anticipated press conference in Turin in October of 1988, seemed to be the final, immutable word on the matter. The Shroud of Turin was not the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ. It was a medieval artifact, and therefore, by direct and unavoidable implication, a forgery. A brilliant, inexplicable, and masterful forgery, perhaps, but a forgery nonetheless. The full carbon dating results were subsequently published in the prestigious, peer-reviewed scientific journal Nature in February of 1989, cementing the verdict in the official annals of science. For many people, both scientists and laypersons alike, this was the definitive end of the story. The mystery, it seemed, was finally and conclusively solved. The shroud could now be recontextualized and appreciated as a remarkable work of medieval art and an object of deep devotion, but its claim to authenticity had been, in their view, scientifically and irrefutably disproven. The headlines around the world declared the case closed. But in the strange and mysterious world of the Shroud of Turin, things are never so simple. The scientific verdict, which was supposed to end the long and contentious debate, instead ignited a fresh firestorm of controversy and gave rise to a whole new generation of complex questions and sophisticated counterarguments, ensuring that the profound mystery of the shroud would endure, perhaps for all time. The 1988 carbon dating results landed like a scientific bombshell across the global stage, and for a significant period of time, it seemed as though the centuries-old, deeply cherished mystery of the Shroud of Turin had been definitively and conclusively solved. The verdict from three of the world's most prestigious laboratories was unanimous and clear. The cloth was medieval. For the mainstream media, which thrives on clear and simple resolutions, and for a large portion of the scientific community, which places its faith in empirical data, the case was effectively closed. The shroud was relegated to the category of a fascinating historical curiosity, a masterpiece of medieval deception. But for a dedicated, passionate, and highly specialized group of researchers, scientists, and believers known as syndenologists, scholars who devote their entire lives to studying the shroud in all its multifaceted complexity, the verdict was not a conclusion, but a call to arms. It was not an end, but the beginning of a new and intensely rigorous battle. They fundamentally refused to accept that a single scientific test, however powerful, could so easily dismiss the veritable mountain of other inexplicable and contradictory evidence, from the anachronistic photographic negative properties of the image to the forensically perfect and anatomically precise wounds it depicts. Their response was to turn the scientific lens back onto the 1988 test itself. They began to meticulously scrutinize every aspect of the carbon dating event, questioning its methodology, its underlying assumptions, and, most critically, the integrity of the very sample that was used. This intense re-examination led to a wave of compelling, sophisticated, and highly technical counterarguments. It was a scientific pushback that sought not to attack science itself, but to challenge the validity of this specific test and, in doing so, reopen a case that the rest of the world considered shut. These arguments powerfully suggest that the science that proved the shroud of fake might have been fundamentally and fatally flawed from the very beginning. The first, most prominent, and most widely discussed of these counterarguments is the invisible reweaving hypothesis. This elegant theory doesn't challenge the fundamental accuracy of the accelerator mass spectrometry technology itself. Instead, it mounts a direct and powerful challenge to the integrity of the single, tiny sample that was tested back in 1988. Proponents of this hypothesis argue, with considerable supporting evidence, that the scientists, through no fault of their own, did not actually date a pure piece of the original first-century cloth. Instead, they unknowingly dated a skillfully crafted medieval repair patch. The historical basis for this compelling claim is solid and undisputed. The shroud has had a long, tumultuous, and perilous history. It has been handled, displayed, and exposed to the elements for many centuries. Most significantly, it survived a devastating and well-documented fire in the year 1532 while it was housed in the Sainte-Chapelle in Chambéry, France. The intense heat of that fire caused its heavy silver casket to begin to melt, and drops of molten silver dripped onto the folded layers of the cloth, burning clean through them. To repair this significant damage, and also to strengthen the outer edges of the relic which were becoming frayed from centuries of being held up for public display, a group of Poor Clare nuns performed meticulous and extensive repairs in the year 1534. The invisible reweaving theory posits that these nuns, who were acknowledged as master weavers of their time, did much more than just stitch on a simple backing cloth to support the fragile linen. It is argued that they skillfully and artfully rewove new, 16th-century cotton or linen threads directly into the damaged fabric of the original shroud, particularly along the edges, to reinforce and seamlessly blend the repaired areas. This highly specialized technique, known as French invisible reweaving, is a form of textile artistry designed to make repairs virtually undetectable to the naked eye. The single sample for the 1988 carbon dating was taken from one specific location on the very corner of the shroud, an area that proponents of this theory argue was the most likely to have been damaged by handling and subsequently repaired by the nuns. They contend, therefore, that the small piece of cloth that was cut and sent to the 3 laboratories was not a pure sample, but was in fact a composite material, a microscopic blend of original, first-century linen and the much younger, 16th-century repair threads. When the carbon dating was performed, the much higher concentration of newer, medieval carbon from the abundant repair threads would have completely overwhelmed the tiny amount of ancient carbon from the sparse, original threads, thus dramatically skewing the results and producing an averaged-out medieval date for the entire sample. This theory gained significant scientific traction when later, independent microscopic and chemical analyses of the area adjacent to the sample site seemed to show significant anomalies, including the presence of dyed cotton fibers intricately intertwined with the linen, which some researchers claim is direct, physical evidence of a medieval patch. If this hypothesis is correct, then the 1988 carbon dating was a success in one sense. It accurately told us the age of a medieval repair, not the age of the shroud itself. Building on this foundational idea of a compromised sample, another major counterargument focuses on the pervasive and difficult problem of contamination. This theory suggests that even if the sample taken was from the original first-century cloth, its long and storied 2,000-year history has left it heavily and deeply contaminated with newer sources of carbon, which would have also seriously skewed the radiocarbon dating results, making it appear much younger than it truly is. Over its long history, the shroud has been anything but sealed in a sterile, controlled laboratory environment. It has been held and touched by countless thousands of people, from kings and bishops to common pilgrims, each one leaving behind microscopic traces of bodily oils, sweat, and skin cells. It has been displayed for long periods in smoky, candlelit cathedrals, exposed to the atmospheric soot and pollution of burning candles and incense for many centuries. Most critically, it was subjected to the intense heat and billowing smoke of the 1532 fire in Chambéry. The process of dousing the flames with water would have created a complex chemical reaction, essentially boiling a thick, carbon-rich soup of contaminants deep into the very fibers of the linen. Scientists who support this view, most notably the late, respected chemist Raymond Rogers of the original STIRP team, have argued that this long history of exposure has created a bioplastic coating on the individual linen fibers. This nearly invisible coating is composed of centuries of accumulated organic material, including bacteria, fungi, pollen, and wax from candles, all of which contain modern carbon from more recent times. When the sample was prepared for dating in 1988, the cleaning methods used were, according to these critics, woefully insufficient to remove this deeply embedded and chemically bonded coating. Therefore, when the laboratories dated the sample, they were not just dating the cellulose of the original linen, they were dating a combination of the ancient linen and its much younger, carbon-rich coating. This abundant newer carbon would have made the entire sample appear significantly younger than it truly is, easily and predictably shifting a first-century date into the Middle Ages. Rogers himself, in the years after the 1988 test, performed independent chemical tests on threads from both the main body of the shroud and from the area adjacent to the C-14 sample site. He claimed to have found definitive evidence of this bioplastic coating, as well as significant chemical differences between the two areas, lending strong, empirical scientific weight to the contamination theory. Beyond the heated and highly technical arguments about the validity of the sample itself, we move into more exotic, more controversial, and far more speculative scientific territory. One of the most fascinating and thought-provoking of these theories proposes that the very unique event that created the mysterious image on the shroud is also directly responsible for corrupting its carbon date. This is the neutron radiation theory. This hypothesis fully and unapologetically embraces the belief that the shroud is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus and that the enigmatic image was formed by an intense, miraculous, and powerful burst of energy released from his body at the moment of the resurrection. The theory suggests that this singular event would have been a massive nuclear and radiative event, releasing a powerful, instantaneous flood of neutrons. These neutrons would have irradiated the entire burial chamber, including, most importantly, the linen shroud that was wrapped around the body. According to the established principles of nuclear physics, when a neutron strikes the nucleus of a nitrogen-14 atom, which is abundant in the atmosphere and therefore present in the linen fibers, it can be captured by the nucleus. This capture causes the nitrogen atom to become unstable and immediately eject a proton, transforming it into a carbon-14 atom. In essence, this intense and localized burst of radiation would have created a fresh, new supply of carbon-14 atoms directly within the fabric of the shroud. This sudden, artificial creation of new radiocarbon would have effectively reset the shroud's radiocarbon clock. The laboratories in 1988 were meticulously measuring the total amount of carbon-14 in their sample to determine its age, but they were working under the fundamental and unchallenged assumption that the only carbon-14 present was the original, naturally occurring amount that was absorbed from the atmosphere by the first-century flax plant. They did not, and scientifically could not, account for a massive, secondary infusion of new carbon-14 created by a miraculous, localized radiative event. This new, artificially created carbon-14 would have made an ancient, first-century cloth test as if it were much younger, perhaps even as the dating showed, medieval. This theory is highly compelling to many believers because it provides a single, elegant, and unified explanation for both the mysterious, inexplicable formation of the image and the anomalous, contradictory carbon dating result. However, it is also highly speculative and, by its very nature, lies outside the realm of what can be tested or proven by mainstream science, as it presupposes a supernatural, one-time event. Skeptical critics also point out that such an intense burst of radiation would have likely destroyed the delicate cloth entirely, or at least left other distinct radiological signatures that have not been detected. This leads us to what is perhaps the most powerful and intuitive counterargument of all, one that brings the entire debate full circle. It is the persistent, undeniable, and deeply frustrating problem of the image itself. Proponents of the shroud's authenticity constantly and rightly point back to the original, comprehensive findings of the STURP team. They pose a simple, yet profoundly challenging, question to the skeptics. If the shroud is a medieval forgery, as the carbon dating suggests, then please explain, step by step, how is it made? To this day, no one, not a single artist, scientist, or historian has ever been able to successfully and convincingly replicate the unique, complex, and contradictory properties of the image on the Shroud of Turin. A hypothetical medieval forger, working in the 14th century, would have had to be a genius of almost unimaginable and anachronistic proportions. He would have had to create an image that is purely superficial, with no pigments or dyes. He would have had to encode perfect, three-dimensional information into a two-dimensional cloth, a scientific concept that wasn't properly understood until the 20th century with the invention of modern imaging technology. Most inexplicably, he would have had to create the entire image as a perfect photographic negative, a concept that was completely unknown and unimagined until the invention of photography 500 years later. The challenge is a formidable and, to date, an insurmountable one. If it was painted, where is the paint? If it was scorched, how is the image controlled with such exquisite subtlety without damaging the cloth more severely? If it was a rubbing from a statue, where are the directional strokes and the physical distortion of the weave? Every proposed method for creating a forgery, from acid painting to dust rubbings to primitive photographic techniques, has been tested and has failed to reproduce all the unique and specific characteristics of the shroud image. The science that proves the shroud is a medieval fake cannot, at the same time, offer any plausible scientific explanation for how that fake could have possibly been created in the Middle Ages. This creates a profound and inescapable intellectual paradox. You cannot have it both ways. The shroud cannot be a simple medieval forgery if the technology required to make it did not exist in the Middle Ages. This central, unanswered question of formation is the bedrock upon which the entire case for the shroud's authenticity rests, a powerful and logical rebuttal to the seemingly definitive verdict of the carbon date. Finally, it is important to note that in the years since the controversial 1988 test, the scientific landscape has continued to evolve. Researchers, deeply frustrated by the controversies and limitations surrounding the single carbon dating event, have attempted to use newer, often non-destructive, dating methods to test the shroud's age again. These methods are more recent and, it must be said, are not as universally accepted or as precise as radiocarbon dating, but their results have been consistently tantalizing. One method, which analyzes the natural degradation over time of a chemical compound called vanillin found in flax plants, has produced a date range that is much older than the medieval period and is entirely consistent with a first-century origin. Other independent studies using various forms of spectroscopic analysis, which measure the chemical properties and molecular decay of the linen fibers over time, have also proposed dates that are much closer to the time of Christ. While these results are still considered preliminary and are fiercely debated within the broader scientific community, they've succeeded in doing one crucial thing. They've thrown the once solid, monolithic verdict of the 1988 carbon dating into a state of scientific limbo. They powerfully suggest that the story is not over and that the final, definitive scientific chapter on the age of the Shroud of Turin has yet to be written. The counterarguments have successfully and skillfully transformed what was once a seemingly closed case into an active, vibrant, and deeply polarized scientific debate, ensuring that this profound mystery will continue to challenge and fascinate us for many years to come. The scientific debates surrounding the Shroud of Turin, with their complex arguments about carbon dating, contamination, and image formation, can often feel abstract and overwhelming. But there is another, equally important, path of inquiry into this profound mystery, the path of history. To understand the Shroud, we must try to trace its journey through time, following its historical paper trail from the present day back as far as the records will allow. This historical investigation is a fascinating detective story, a quest to piece together the provenance, or the chain of custody, of this remarkable object. While the scientific evidence is hotly contested, the historical record presents its own set of compelling certainties and frustrating, gaping holes. The Shroud does not simply appear out of nowhere. It has a documented past, a story of how it was owned, displayed, protected, and venerated. But that clear, documented history only goes back so far, leaving a vast and mysterious gap of more than 1,000 years that believers and historians have been desperately trying to bridge ever since. The undisputed, rock-solid, and verifiable history of the Shroud of Turin begins not in the ancient Middle East, but in the heart of 14th century Europe. The first time an object matching the exact description of the Shroud appears clearly and unambiguously in the historical record is in the 1350s, in the small, unassuming town of Lire, France. It was in the possession of a highly respected and pious French knight named Geoffroy de Charny. He was a celebrated figure, a hero of the 100 Years' War, and a man of considerable standing. Sometime around the year 1355, Geoffroy de Charny built a small collegiate church in Lire and announced that he was in possession of the true burial shroud of Jesus Christ. He put this long linen cloth, bearing the faint double image of a crucified man, on public display for veneration by the faithful. The exhibition caused an immediate sensation. Pilgrims began to flock to the small church to gaze upon what they believed was a direct, physical link to Jesus himself. However, this public display also attracted immediate controversy and suspicion. The local bishop, a man named Pierre d'Arcis, was deeply skeptical. In the medieval period, the trade in holy relics was a massive and often corrupt business. For every true relic, there were countless forgeries created to dupe pious pilgrims out of their money. Bishop d'Arcis launched an official investigation into the matter. He was troubled by the fact that Geoffroy de Charny, a man of otherwise impeccable character, could provide no explanation for how he had obtained such an unbelievably significant relic. There was no historical record of it, no story of its journey from Jerusalem to France. In a scathing report written to the Pope in Avignon, Bishop d'Arcis declared, with absolute certainty, that the shroud was a fake. He went even further, claiming that his predecessor had also investigated the matter and had discovered the truth. He wrote that the shroud had been cunningly painted, and that he had even found the artist who had made it, who had confessed to creating the image as a work of art. This explosive accusation from a high-ranking church official at the very moment of the shroud's first appearance is a critical piece of historical evidence for skeptics. They argue that this document is, in effect, the smoking gun, proof that from the very beginning, the shroud was known to be a clever and man-made object. This historical starting point aligns perfectly with the medieval date provided by the 1988 carbon dating, creating a powerful case for the shroud being a 14th century creation. Despite the bishop's condemnation, the shroud's popularity and the prestige of its owner allowed it to survive the initial controversy. After the death of Geoffroy de Charny, the cloth remained in the possession of his family for several decades. Then, in a pivotal moment in its history, the shroud passed into the hands of one of the most powerful and influential noble families in Europe. In 1453, Margaret de Charny, the granddaughter of the original owner, sold the relic to the Duke Louis I of the House of Savoy. The Savoys were a formidable dynasty, ruling territories that spanned parts of modern-day France, Switzerland, and Italy. They were also devoutly Catholic and great collectors of holy relics. For them, acquiring the shroud was a major coup, a symbol of their piety and their rising power. The House of Savoy would go on to become the final royal family of a unified Italy, and they would act as the official, devoted guardians of the shroud for the next 500 years. Under the ownership of the Savoys, the shroud was treated with the utmost reverence. They built a beautiful new chapel specifically to house it in their capital city of Chambéry, France. For decades, the shroud was the centerpiece of the Savoy dynasty's religious life, a treasured possession that solidified their status as important protectors of the Christian faith. But this period of peaceful veneration was shattered by a near-catastrophic event. In the early morning hours of December 4th, 1532, a devastating fire broke out in the Sainte-Chapelle of Chambéry. The fire raged through the chapel, consuming everything in its path. The shroud itself was stored in a heavy, ornate silver casket, which was placed in a niche behind the high altar. As the fire intensified, the silver casket became superheated, glowing red-hot. The immense heat caused the silver to melt, and drops of molten metal dripped onto the folded linen cloth inside. A brave local blacksmith, with the help of 2 Franciscan friars, managed to break into the burning chapel and retrieve the casket, dousing it with water to cool it down. When they finally opened it, they saw that the shroud had been severely damaged, but miraculously not destroyed. The molten silver had burned clean through its many folded layers, leaving a series of symmetrical, dark scorch marks. The water used to extinguish the flames also left large, distinctive water stains. These burn marks and water stains are still clearly visible on the shroud today, a permanent and dramatic scar from the day it almost met its end. As mentioned earlier, it was after this fire that the Poor Clare nuns performed their famous repairs, sewing the damaged shroud onto a new backing cloth, known as the Holland cloth, and patching the burn holes, repairs that would become central to the later carbon dating controversy. After the fire, the House of Savoy decided to move its capital. In 1578, the shroud was moved from Chambéry, France, to its final and permanent home in the city of Turin, in northern Italy. The official reason for the move was a compassionate one. The elderly and ailing Archbishop of Milan, St. Charles Borromeo, had made a vow to walk on foot to Chambéry to venerate the shroud in thanks for Milan being spared from a plague. To save the elderly archbishop from the arduous journey across the Alps, the Duke of Savoy, Emanuele Filiberto, decided to bring the holy relic to him. The shroud was ceremoniously transported to Turin, where it has remained ever since. It is for this reason that the relic, which spent its early documented history in France, is known to the world today as the Shroud of Turin. It was housed in the Turin Cathedral, where it has been protected by the Savoy family and now by the Vatican for over 400 years. This documented history, from its first appearance in Lire in the 1350s to its current home in Turin, is clear, undisputed, and accepted by all historians. The problem, for those who believe in the shroud's authenticity, is the immense 1,300-year gap in the historical record that precedes it. If the shroud is truly the burial cloth of Jesus, where was it for all those centuries? This is where the historical detective work becomes far more speculative, and where believers have put forth a fascinating and compelling theory. To bridge this vast gap in its history, many researchers and historians have proposed that the Shroud of Turin and another famous, but now lost, holy relic are, in fact, one and the same object. This other relic was known as the image of Edessa, or more commonly, the Mandylion. The story of the Mandylion is an ancient one. It was a cloth, or tetradiplon, a word meaning doubled in four, which was said to bear a miraculous, not made by human hands, image of the face of Jesus. According to legend, it was sent by Jesus himself to King Abgar of Edessa, a city in modern-day Turkey, to heal him of leprosy. This cloth, bearing only the image of the face, was treasured in Edessa for centuries. It was first clearly documented in the 6th century and was described as being a faint, mysterious image on a piece of linen. In the year 944, the Mandylion was taken from Edessa by the Byzantine army and brought in a triumphal procession to the imperial capital of Constantinople. There, It became the most important and sacred relic in the entire Byzantine Empire, housed in the Pharos Chapel alongside other relics of the Passion. Historical records from Constantinople describe the cloth and the faint image upon it. One archdeacon in the 12th century even noted that it was more than just a face. He described it as a full-body image, though one that was extremely faint and difficult to make out. This description starts to sound remarkably like the shroud. The theory then proposes a crucial link. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, the armies of Western Europe, instead of fighting in the Holy Land, turned on their Christian brethren and brutally sacked the city of Constantinople. In the chaos of the looting, the city's most sacred relics, including the Dandelion, disappeared without a trace. This is where the theory becomes truly compelling. The Dandelion vanishes from history in 1204. Then, just over 150 years later, in the 1350s, the Shroud of Turin cloth bearing a faint, full-body image of a crucified man appears in the possession of Geoffroy de Charny, a French knight. Proponents of this theory argue that it is highly likely that a Crusader knight, perhaps an ancestor of Geoffroy de Charny, looted the Dandelion from Constantinople in 1204 and brought it back to France. The family would have kept it as a secret, private treasure for several generations before finally deciding to put it on public display. This theory elegantly bridges the 1,300-year gap. The shroud was the Dandelion. The reason it was known only as a face image for centuries is because it was stored doubled in four, folded in such a way that only the face was visible, and it was likely kept in an ornate reliquary that framed the face. The historical paper trail, in this view, is not broken. It simply changes names. It traces a path from 1st century Judea to Edessa to Constantinople and finally, via a Crusader knight, to France and then to Turin. This connection provides a plausible, though not definitively proven, historical lineage for the shroud that takes it all the way back to antiquity, directly challenging the medieval dating and offering a powerful narrative for its authenticity. After navigating the intricate and often bewildering labyrinth of advanced scientific analysis, controversial carbon dating, and the fragmented, century-spanning historical paper trail, we finally arrive at the very heart of the Shroud of Turin's enduring and almost magnetic power. The final part of our investigative journey must necessarily move beyond the charts of empirical evidence and the timelines of history and into the equally complex, compelling, and deeply human realms of faith, art, and the profound nature of mystery itself. The Shroud of Turin is not just a scientific puzzle to be solved or a historical artifact to be catalogued. It is a unique and powerful object that evokes deep, visceral, and often contradictory emotions in all who encounter it. It forces us to confront fundamental and often uncomfortable questions about what we believe, how we believe it, and where the limits of our knowledge truly lie. Whether it is an authentic, miraculous relic from the 1st century or a man-made, albeit brilliant, forgery from the 14th, its immense cultural and spiritual significance is undeniable. To truly understand the Shroud, we must explore the multifaceted meaning it holds for humanity and grapple with the ultimate, unanswered question that it so powerfully and silently represents. Let us first consider the most challenging and mind-bending proposition for the skeptics, the logical conclusion that must be drawn if one accepts the scientific verdict. If the Shroud of Turin is indeed a forgery, as the 1988 carbon dating so strongly suggests, then we are forced to acknowledge that it is the work of a brilliant, almost supernaturally gifted, artistic genius. This is not hyperbole or an exaggeration for dramatic effect. It is a simple statement of fact based on the evidence. If a single, unknown artist, working in the technological and intellectual environment of the 14th century, created this object, then we are faced with a talent so far beyond that of his contemporaries, so anachronistically advanced, that the creation of the forgery borders on the miraculous in its own right. We must try to imagine this hypothetical medieval forger, a man who somehow possessed a depth of knowledge and a range of disparate skills that simply should not have existed, let alone coexisted, in one person in his time. he would have had to create a work of art with a host of unique physical and chemical properties that we, with all our advanced 21st century technology and our deep understanding of chemistry and physics, still cannot fully and faithfully replicate today. Think for a moment about the sheer, mind-boggling audacity and the intellectual horsepower of what this hypothetical artist would have had to achieve. First, he would have had to invent a completely new artistic medium, creating an image that was purely superficial, one that did not use paint, ink, powder, or dye in any conventional way, and one that only affected the very topmost fibers of the linen cloth with a consistent, controlled depth. He would have needed to invent a technique that no other artist of his time, or indeed any time since, has ever used or documented. Next, and even more astonishingly, he would have had to encode perfect, three-dimensional information into this two-dimensional image. He would have needed to create a precise, mathematical correlation between the lightness and darkness of the image and the distance of a human body from the closest scientific concept that was utterly alien to the flat, stylized world of medieval art and wasn't fully understood or technically achievable until the space age and the advent of digital image processing. But most inexplicably of all, he would have had to conceive of and create the entire image as a perfect photographic negative, a scientific concept that would not be discovered, named, or understood for another 500 years. He would have had to possess a preternatural, almost prophetic, understanding of optics and light, painstakingly creating his work in reversed tones to produce a ghostly, almost invisible image that would only reveal its true, stunningly lifelike form through a yet-to-be-invented technology. And as if that weren't enough, this same individual would also have needed to be a master of forensic anatomy and pathology. He would have to have known, for example, that Roman crucifixion nails were driven through the wrists and not the palms, a fact contrary to every artistic depiction of his era. He would have needed to accurately depict the unique, dumbbell-shaped wounds of a Roman flagrum, the effects of rigor mortis on the body, the precise angle of a spear wound to the chest, and the separation of blood and serum from post-mortem wounds. This hypothetical medieval forger would have been a Leonardo da Vinci, a forensic pathologist, a nuclear physicist, and a photographic pioneer, all rolled into one. He would have been a man of such towering, multidisciplinary genius that he left no other mark on history, no other works, no students, and no written records, save for this single, perfect, and completely anonymous creation. The enduring mystery of the identity of this superforger is, in many ways, a greater and more baffling mystery than the shroud itself. This very implausibility leads us to a more nuanced, theologically sophisticated, and perhaps more satisfying perspective, one that is held by many modern theologians, art historians, and even some open-minded believers who accept the medieval dating but still see immense, authentic value in the shroud. In this view, the obsessive, black-and-white question of historical authenticity is, in a way, a distraction from the object's true purpose and its profound spiritual power. They argue that the shroud's deep and abiding spiritual value is not, and should not be, dependent on it being the literal, historical burial cloth of Jesus. Instead, they see it as a sublime and unparalleled work of devotional art, a meditation on the Passion created not to deceive, but to inspire, by a deeply and genuinely faithful medieval artist. The primary purpose of this object, they contend, was to serve as a powerful tool for contemplation. In an age when the vast majority of people were illiterate and could not read the Gospels for themselves, powerful visual aids were essential for religious teaching and for fostering a personal connection to the divine. This unknown artist, they believe, wanted to create an image that would allow the faithful to truly visualize and thereby emotionally connect with the immense suffering and sacrifice of Christ in a way that no traditional, stylized painting ever could. To achieve this, he would have used the most advanced, perhaps even secret, techniques at his disposal. Techniques he may have developed himself to create an image that felt real, that felt miraculous, because he wanted to evoke a real and miraculous faith in the heart of the viewer. The shroud, in this thoughtful interpretation, is not a cynical forgery designed to trick gullible pilgrims out of their money, but a masterpiece of faith, created out of a place of deep, personal piety. It is the ultimate visual sermon, a a silent, powerful, and deeply moving testament to the central event of the entire Christian story. Its unique and mysterious properties, the negative image, the detailed wounds, the lack of paint, were not intended to fool future scientists with their advanced equipment. They were intentionally crafted to create a sense of awe, reverence, and profound mystery, to make the medieval viewer feel as though they were in the presence of something truly divine, something not made by ordinary human hands. From this perspective, arguing about carbon atoms and bioplastic contamination misses the point entirely. The shroud's ultimate truth lies not in its historical age, but in its enduring spiritual impact. It is a work of human art so powerful and so imbued with faith that it transcends the question of its own origin and becomes a truly sacred object in its own right. Caught directly in the middle of this intense and often polarized debate between science and faith is the official, carefully calibrated position of the Catholic Church itself, which has been famously, and perhaps very wisely, ambiguous for decades. The Church is the ultimate owner and designated guardian of the Shroud of Turin, having been officially gifted it by the House of Savoy in 1983. Yet it is a crucial and often misunderstood point that the Church has never, not once, officially and dogmatically declared the shroud to be the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ. While modern popes, from John Paul II to Francis, have visited it, prayed before it, and spoken eloquently of its profound spiritual power, the Vatican has meticulously and consistently avoided making a definitive, infallible dogmatic statement on its authenticity. Instead, it has skillfully navigated a middle path that honors both faith and reason. It refers to the shroud not as a relic, a term which would imply confirmed authenticity, but as a powerful icon, a sacred image that invites prayer, devotion, and a deep contemplation of the Passion of Christ. This carefully chosen language allows the Church to acknowledge and validate the deep and sincere faith that millions of people have in the shroud without directly contradicting the powerful scientific evidence that points to a medieval origin. It, in essence, leaves the final judgment on its authenticity to the personal faith of individual believers and to the ongoing, and as yet inconclusive, work of scientists. This careful, diplomatic stance allows the shroud to remain a powerful and effective tool for devotion, while keeping the institution of the Church out of a direct and potentially unwinnable war with modern science. The intense and enduring fascination with the Shroud of Turin, whether one believes it is real or not, perfectly and powerfully illustrates the immense power that holy relics hold over the human imagination. Throughout human history and in many different religions around the world, relics, physical objects that are believed to have been in direct contact with a holy person or a sacred event, have been objects of immense and powerful veneration. They are seen as more than just mere symbols. They are believed to be potent points of contact, tangible, physical links between the mundane, earthly world and the transcendent divine realm. For a believing Christian, a fragment of the true cross or the bone of a martyred saint is not just a historical curiosity. It is an object imbued with sacred power, a conduit for prayer. The Shroud of Turin represents the ultimate and most profound expression of this idea. If it is authentic, it is, without question, the most important Christian relic in existence. It is the very cloth that would have touched the body of Jesus at the most pivotal and mysterious moment in all of Christian theology, the sacred transition from his death on the cross to his glorious resurrection from the dead. For a believer, to stand in the presence of the shroud is to stand in the presence of that moment. It is a direct, physical link to the central miracle of their faith. This deep, powerful, and instinctual human desire for a tangible connection to the divine is what gives the shroud its immense emotional and spiritual power, a power that remains astonishingly potent even in the face of contrary and compelling scientific evidence. Ultimately, after all the sophisticated scientific tests have been run, all the fragmented historical records have been examined, and all the nuanced theological arguments have been made, we are left with the most powerful and unconquerable element of all, the enduring and captivating power of mystery. The fundamental reason the Shroud of Turin continues to fascinate both devout believers and hardened skeptics alike is its stubborn, almost defiant, refusal to be definitively solved. It is a perfect, self-sustaining enigma. It seems to exist in a state of perpetual and unresolvable paradox. Every scientific answer seems to create a new and more difficult historical question. The carbon dating proves it is medieval, but that same science cannot begin to explain how a medieval artist could possibly create such an object. The image's unique and anachronistic properties strongly suggest authenticity, but the historical record is completely and frustratingly silent for 1,300 years. It is an object that sits at the exact, uncomfortable, and fascinating intersection of science and faith, of history and art. It challenges the core assumptions of everyone who studies it. It forces the scientist to confront a physical artifact that their established models cannot explain, and it forces the believer to confront a historical and scientific record that seems to directly contradict their most cherished faith. This unresolved, creative tension is precisely what makes the shroud so uniquely and enduringly compelling. It is a mirror that reflects our own beliefs, our own biases, and our own profound limitations. It may be that the shroud's ultimate purpose is not to provide us with a final, simple answer, but to perpetually ask a questione deep and resonant question that invites us to contemplate the profound mysteries of life, death, suffering, and the eternal possibility of transcendence. The final truth, for now, remains securely and silently hidden in its ancient, enigmatic fibers. In the end, the Shroud of Turin remains a paradox. For the faithful, it is a sacred snapshot of the resurrection, a divine relic beyond scientific explanation. For skeptics, it is the most ingenious forgery ever created. After centuries of debate and decades of testing, this single piece of linen continues to challenge our assumptions, forcing us to confront the limits of both our science and our faith. The final truth remains hidden in its fibers. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. What mystery should we unravel next? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep digging into history's secrets together.